Hello there. In today's video blog, I'm addressing the probably most difficult topic yet. Why do children break off all contact with their parents in a cult situation? I got jump started to think about this when someone just coincidentally forwarded an email to me by a psychologist who focuses on Christians being hurt in Christianity. And so I just emailed him telling him about my video resources, and he responded saying that he had already heard about my videos from a client who apparently has 4 children that broke off all contact with him. And obviously that is devastating. So I felt I needed to address that and think about how it worked for me and how I got lifted from that spell that was put on me. Unfortunately for my parents, the sad truth is that a great reason why someone was able to get me to break off all contact with my parents, because in a way, in my childhood, there was the tracks being laid. How were the tracks being laid to later make so many bad decisions and hand over my own power to someone else? Well, I'm afraid a great deal of that was that my self wasn't really allowed to be developed. It's nobody's, fault, or nobody meant to do this. It's kind of society and the way we think we need to treat children. My father was very authoritarian, and he really set out to teach me how to think critically. We talked about it. We had all those tough conversations after I got out. But what in fact I learned was to wonder, what would my dad say? And so later I would think, when I came around these Christian people, what would God think? What would Jesus think? And that quickly turned into, what would the leaders think? Because they were basically God in my life. That's what I received, what I accepted to be the truth. So hence the question, what do I think? Not what would I think, but what do I actually think? What do I feel? What sense am I getting? Does it feel good? Does it feel bad? Does it feel weird? Am I having questions? Do I have a bad gut feeling? Any of those things. I was not taught that this whole dimension of what do I think, what do I perceive is valid. And when a person doesn't learn to think of themselves and what they're perceiving as valid, they will receive someone else's perspective as valid, someone else's thoughts as valid. And that is a tough pill to swallow. I think David Johnson, the retired pastor and author of The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse, co-author, said it very well in the interviews. He said it at different points, that if you don't know yourself, how can you lay down yourself? You can't even choose to lay down yourself because you haven't even defined it yet. This is where I start and this is where I end, or someone else begins. It has a lot to do with boundaries too, which is another thing that was not a very well taught thing in my family, and it caused many problems for me personally. So I think if you're asking for advice, your kids have broken off all contact with you, what should you do? The tough part is going to be for you to look at what was your part in it. Did you lay the foundation for them to later just turn to another authoritarian voice that maybe had promises for them that were more valuable than what you were able to hold over them? But I say that with greatest humility, because I have my own child, and I understand how much more easy it is to just tell the kid what to do, tell the kid what to think. Here's another example from my cult, how multiple people were able to were broken off from their families. What Paul was teaching about, when someone's in grave sin, then don't even have contact with them. That's what it all comes down to. When Paul wrote this little snippet in 1 Corinthians, That's what it all comes down to. And when your leader is the voice of God in your life, then what do you do if God is saying to you, well, your parents, they're not part of this group, or I don't know, your mom has a boyfriend, or whatever it is, whatever the standard is that is being broken by your parents, then that is the logical conclusion. And if you don't do that, if you don't break off contact with your parents, then you are in disobedience toward God, which will mean, in the logic of a cult, that you will probably go to hell, and nobody wants to go to hell. So a great part of the realization could be, this is not personal against you. I would say the leaders recognize your power, your importance in the life of the kid or the children, which is why they had to vilify you. They had to make the kid feel like, look at your dad. He tried to control you all your life. And your whole family, they always badger you with their opinions and so forth. And it's probably true. That is the crazy thing. But what the child or the young adult doesn't recognize is that the leader is doing the exact same thing. And the self of this maturing person is not being validated whatsoever. It's just, oh, my job in your life is to make sure that you're not under their bad influence anymore, because all they want is to control you, but you can trust me. That is deception. The truth is, yep, your parents or whoever probably had undue influence on you and didn't raise you up to think for yourself. Nobody is perfect. That is just the reality of it. But then they just step into that little vacuum when kids tune out the voice from whoever it was, be it a parent or a former spouse or boyfriend or whatever it might be, friends. So there's a real system to it, and it happens all over the place, and you can use all sorts of Bible verses to do that. But then obviously when we look at the Bible through Jesus, we cannot miss that Jesus sat with the sinners. So even if you are, according to the rules of the cult, a sinner, they ought to get the message, if they look at Jesus, reading the Bible through the lens of Jesus, that Jesus sat with the sinners. He loved them. Okay? So sometimes I think there can be a healthy aspect, a healthy reason to separate yourself a little bit from your birth family just to find yourself. But in these cult circumstances, situations, they're not giving you a healthy situation so you can kind of move away from all voices so that you can find your own voice. It's never going to happen in this kind of authoritarian system where they say those guys are the villains, we're the good guys. It's never going to happen this way. This way you will just learn to bow to the voice of another. So yeah, in my cult, it was the reality that kids didn't speak to their own parents or their divorced moms, that I wasn't allowed to go to my sister's wedding, which caused all sorts of negative events in as a consequence. And because they reacted so strongly, I decided they are my enemies. They are the enemies of God. They are the enemies of what God wants to accomplish through me. And if they react so strongly in opposition to what I am told I'm supposed to do, I want to say I feel I was supposed to do, but the truth is, by the time I spent some years with them, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Myself was just, I knew I didn't want to hurt my sister, that was for sure. But I didn't know anymore if I wanted to go to the wedding or if I didn't want to go. All I knew was I don't want to mess up my chances to go to heaven. And so I just did what the leaders told me to do. So you see how messed up this whole scenario is. Which leads me to, how can you from now on act to hopefully get your family that broke off contact with you to reconnect with you. I think if it's possible, tell them that you respect their choices if that is what they want. Yeah, there's so much power in saying to someone, I respect what you're choosing to do if that is what you want. Because in there is this little if that is what you want. And the truth is, in a cult setting, nobody knows what they want anymore, except the leaders. They have a very clear idea of where they want to get, and that is people obedient and getting them to the level of success that they think they ought to have. You know, that's what God has designated to them. So if you give someone the respect of saying, if this is what you want, it might spark something inside of them of, what do I want? Actually, I don't want not to have no contact with my family. I do, just on different terms. So the reality is that the terms of your relationship will probably have to change. While we had hardly any contact with my own parents when I was in the cult, and I'm speaking now from the perspective of my then fiance and later husband, we had more contact with his mother. Because there was an understanding that she had that we chose to be there, and it was giving us something, and we weren't able to go or say we're done here. So she respected that and just, you know, let us talk about it, and maybe every once in a while asked us, so how does that glorify God? That was a good question. How does that glorify God? And we didn't have any answers, but it certainly allowed for that relationship to stay open. But you know what she did behind closed doors? She prayed. She went with her broken heart, with her understanding that this is all incredibly messed up, that we were just slaves to other people now. She went with that heart to God and said to him, get them out, get them out. And one day, she just told me that recently, she woke up and she heard they're gonna come back. And she ended up being right, because we did come literally back to America. I want to give you a little encounter I had with my little son this morning, who just turned 4. And I don't want to control him, you know, but I was raised by authoritarian voices. So I sometimes am getting too impatient too quickly. And so that is something I'm very much aware of, and I want to keep working on that. Here's an example, I think, of how allowing the self to develop can look like. My son was talking to his cousin. He's 11 and my son is 4. And apparently he had just missed the time 11:11, and the cousin had told him, well, you just missed your chance to make a wish. And so my son was a little distraught about that. Oh no, I missed my opportunity. And so I said to him, you can still make a wish. What do you want to wish for? And then he said to me, I forgot how you do that. And so I said to him, you know, being all religious and stuff, you can say, God, I would like my Oma and Opa from Germany to come and visit us very soon. And my son was saying, I don't want to wish that. And so I asked him, what do you want to wish for? And he said, thought about it. And then he said, I want to wish for the biggest pizza in the whole wide world. A pizza that's bigger than all the trees and all the people. And that's what he wished for. And I said, okay, that's your wish. That's fine. So there's a validation of, this is who you are, this is what you want, this is your desires, and they are just fine. You know, I don't always have to say, oh, that's not a good idea. Do you know how unhealthy pizza is? We have to eat more balanced than that. And see, I'd even try to put some religion in there. You know, why don't you make your wish to God? You see, the motives are all noble, but in reality, what happens is that a little self, a little soul gets quenched and just becomes a mimicker of what the loudest voice around them does. And so if you have a part, if you can honestly evaluate the life you had with your kids and come to the conclusion, I think I controlled them too much. I think my opinion was too important in the way we raised them. Then be honest about that, and maybe even write a letter or something acknowledging that. I would highly advise, though, to not argue with them about any faith things or doctrine, theology. They have answers to everything. And if they don't have an answer, they'll go to the leader and say, this is what he said now, and I don't know how to respond. And then the leader will say two things. First of all, here's how you respond to that. And second, why do you even talk to him in the first place? So you cannot win with trying to argue. Love will win. Love and freedom. And I know I rambled a whole lot here, but I hope that there were some helpful things in there for you. I know the idea that my son would break off contact with me is the most horrible thing I could imagine. But this is not, the last word in the story. It changed for my family. It changed for a bunch of those other kids in my group that were also young adults, very impressionable, but they're in contact with their family now. Others are not. They're still not. And yep, that's their freedom to do that. And it's just heartbreaking. But know that God had nothing to do with that. This is just people controlling people. With all that, I will release you back to your day and say, be blessed abundantly.